with our intro here. So I want to welcome everybody. I'm so glad you could all join us. We can connect with each other in this way while we can't connect in person. So great to be able to get together with so many people. And we're here today to go over the Counseling Families, Partners, and Significant Others. This is part of our Essential Substance Abuse Skills webinar series. And I'm Kate Trans, if you haven't met me before, but I'm here with Steve Steiny, and he's going to be presenting the information for you, and you can see his face up there. And if any of you want to share your face with us so we can see you, and you can you can give Steve thumbs up, or he can maybe see you laughing at his jokes. You can go up to where that camera is.
Doesn't happen very often, but
I always feel bad when I'm laughing and you can't hear me, Steve, so I want to at least, so you can actually, if you go up to where the camera is in that little drop-down menu on the top right, you can choose Start My Webcam if you have one, and then after that comes up, you'll have to click Share if you want to do that, and that way we could see you too. I'm not sharing my face this morning because I look a little rough. I was doing a little work on my house yesterday, so nobody wants to see me right now. But we'll move on from there. So this training series is brought to you by the National American Indian and Alaska Native Addiction Technology Transfer Center. We're part of the ATTC network, which also includes 10 regional centers, 5 international centers, a network coordinating office, and the National Hispanic and Latino ATTC. In the next couple of days, we will send a follow-up email to everyone who attended, and this will include a link to the recording, handouts of the slides, and a CEU request form. Our center is a NADAC certified educational provider, and we'd be happy to provide you with CEUs for a $15 fee. And you should also know that in our follow-up emails, that does confirm your attendance, and so if you need that for your licensing, that often is good enough just to have that email. Immediately following today's webinar, you will be redirected to our GIPR evaluation. This survey takes just a few minutes to complete and asks about your satisfaction with the event. This feedback is critical to our future work, and we value your opinion and would greatly appreciate your time in sharing your thoughts with us. So please take a few minutes and fill that out. You will be muted for the duration of this webinar, so please use the chat pod to share your questions and comments, and we will address questions at appropriate points during the presentation. As I said, we have Steve Steiny here speaking for us today. He is our program manager for the ATTC and has been an alcohol and drug counselor since 1997. He's worked in the behavioral health services nonprofit sector for the past 23 years and has been in recovery for over 32 years. He's committed his life and profession to helping others in the recovery process. So I want to welcome Steve, and I'm going to pass things over to him at this point.
Well, thank you, Kate, for that nice introduction, and I'm hoping everyone can hear me okay. I'm actually going to turn this off. I'm broadcasting to you. Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see some familiar names on the participants board, and we have a good group today. So I really appreciate you all logging in, and of course this format is something that we've been using quite frequently and for some time. So it's interesting how now everything has gone to sort of this virtual format. So I could say I wish I had you all with me here right now so that we could engage and exchange ideas in person, but with the current situation, obviously that wouldn't be in our best interest. And my apartment is so small that we could probably only get 5 or 6 of us in here comfortably, and then we would be out of room. So there's my first joke of the morning or afternoon, depending on where you're listening from. So yeah, my name is Steve Steiny. I'm hoping today that we can go through some of our slides and make it all the way. I'll make it all the way through the slides, but we're really going to look at involving the family in the counseling process, also spouse, partners, significant others, and some of the history behind working with family as the identified patient in a therapeutic setting. Although this is in the context of, and I'll refer to working with families specifically regarding substance use disorders, we can broaden this out and apply this to any number of contexts when we're talking about working with the family as a whole or a family in part. So I'm hoping we can get through the slides today, and I think Kate will assist me in fielding some questions that you can submit at any time during the broadcast today in the chat box. And if we don't get to them right away, I'm hoping to circle back to those so we can have at least a text dialogue, and more importantly for the listeners to be able to see those questions as well. And perhaps, hey, I see somebody's in there. It looks like Rodrigo. I can see you, brother. Good to see you. Yeah, I'm not alone on the screen finally. Anyway, hopefully we'll have a chance to circle back to some of those questions, and for all of you to be able to. I'm trying, Rita. I can turn up my. See if I can turn up my speaker at all on my phone. Can everybody hear me okay? Is this a little better? Anyway, I'm hoping today that you can also exchange some ideas with one another, either during or after, post presentation, so that we can all be supportive of one another and be able to exchange some ideas moving forward, even after today's broadcast. So really hoping to have a discussion today. So we have quite a few slides. There's probably 60 or so slides we'll move through. Again, I want to just thank everybody for joining me today. I have been now we've been working from home now for, this is day 15 for us working out of our offices. They won't allow us on campus or into the buildings at the College of Public Health. So I've gone completely from home, working from home these last couple of weeks. It's been very challenging in many ways. So again, glad you're here. Let's just take a couple of minutes before we start to just kind of settle our minds, and I just want to open us with a short blessing before we get started. Creator, stay with us. Walk us through this presentation today. Continue to bless and protect all of those out in the world, in the United States and all around the world, that continue to be under pressure and strain with the things happening, the health issues happening in the U.S. And keep us in your light and your love, and keep everyone's families healthy and safe as we move through this as a community, as a global community, but also as a tribal community, and those that are connected to us deeply. Watch over us and protect us. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to open up my screen here and see if I can't get to my notes. That'll help guide me along. So let's see. Yep, I got it. I don't think there's any notes in that first slide, so we're good. So today's topic, we're going to talk about counseling, family counseling in particular, and other issues related to that as we move through this. So some of the objectives that I want to try and go over today, will be related to the following. Just trying to understand the characteristics and the dynamics of family, couples, and significant others affected by substance use disorders. Again, as I said earlier, we can broaden that out if you feel like you want to have a discussion about something beyond just substance use disorders and how it relates to the family, we can do that. Also, to be familiar with and appropriately use the models of diagnosis and intervention for families, couples, significant others, including extended kinship or tribal family structures. And though I'm not native, I did have a chance to speak with one of our directors, or our co-director, Sean Baer, and he gave me some insight and to help me understand a bit more about tribal family structures and how native family structures work. So we'll touch on that briefly later in the broadcast. Also, to just assist families and couples and significant others to understand the interaction between family systems and substance use disorders or related behaviors. Also, to assist families, couples, and significant others to adopt strategies and behaviors that sustain recovery and maintain healthy relationships. So those are just sort of our overall objectives. I'm hearing some background noise. I don't know, Kate, if you're not muted, or maybe someone's, there seems to be some background noise. Hopefully that's not coming from me. Again, bear with me, folks. This is the first time that I've sort of done this from home. So, just trying to get my notes back up here. Oops. Pete, how did you get my notes up? There. They're just so tiny. Okay, we're good. So some things to consider or keep in mind. In my background, in my clinical background, I did often work with youth and families, and the families were really an integral part of that process. And sometimes you had to be very, we'll touch on this later, but sometimes you had to be very careful about when and how to involve the family, depending on the level of function or dysfunction that existed in that family system, respectively. So, but some things I want you to keep in mind as we go through this are some keys to keep some key reasons to use the family or involve the family in the therapeutic process. It can build upon the family's strengths that may be pre-existing. It can improve communication, both quantity and quality. It can decrease conflict. It can also reduce the impact of substance use disorders or mental health issues that may be existing within a family member, or significant, or to address significant change events within the family dynamics. So if there's been a recent loss or a change in the family status, be a good reason to use the family as a therapeutic opportunity to work on some of the family structures. Many times, the answers are within the family, within the people. They're going to know their situations and resources, and are maybe better equipped to mitigate issues and find alternative ways to address, for example, substance use disorder issues. So I think everyone has a little bit different understanding or idea of what family means to them. We don't have to go through these verbatim, but I just, when I thought about what does family mean to me, it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So even from a European perspective, this idea of household or family or the modern sense of family, which is often referred to as connected by blood, whether or not they're living together. This goes way back centuries. There's other definitions. 17th century, the term family man was seen as one devoted to wife or family. The word family values really didn't come into the mainstream sort of therapeutic vernacular until the mid-60s. So family can mean groups of relatives, people who are closely related by birth, marriage, or adoption. Family can mean people living together. It can also refer to lineage, people that are descended from a common ancestor, and for many Native Americans, Native tribal populations, family went beyond just their parents and siblings. So really important to keep that in mind. When I spoke with Sean, he really talked about Native American societies are based on the concept of interdependence. In other words, this means that all things in the universe are dependent on one another, and that the family works to sort of keep this in balance and to achieve balance in yourself and in the community and in the surrounding environment. So it's important to remember and ask yourself what does family mean to me, because it can mean different things for different people. But I wanted to just put that out there as some food for thought. Let's look at family therapy. This just sort of a generic or running definition of this, I think, is important to identify as well. Family therapy is often seen as a type of therapy that involves members of sort of the central or nuclear family, or even step family, or in some cases members of the extended family or adopted family. A therapist or a team or a group of therapists conducts multiple sessions to help families work through important issues that may be interfering with their ability to function. And it could be addressing a patient's recovery and the level of support that patient's receiving at home. I think any of you that have worked in the field or worked with patients in a substance use disorder setting or treatment setting know that the family often is very enmeshed in this process. Either some of the toughest cases I've had were working with youth or young adults that had parents that they were also using with or around, and the use was condoned or at least not something that was accepted as part of their relationship within the family. And that can be very difficult. But I think it's important, Sean Baer reminded me that Native family systems are not based upon the nuclear family system like we would see in a lot of mainstream or European sort of approaches to what family means. Key concepts of family therapy. This idea that the whole system is more than the sum of its parts. I think that is an important aspect to remember, and that the parts of the system are interconnected with one another, and certain rules determine the functioning of the family system, and that these systems are dynamic and carefully trying to these family systems are trying to balance themselves and have some continuity against change. And I know, Sean again talked with me about rules and roles in family systems that are in place in tribal families. And this oftentimes may consist of an adopted family member, not a formal sort of European adoption process, but rather sort of a culturally traditionally adoption sense of the word. So it's important, I think, to keep that in mind too as we discuss and talk about working with the family in a treatment setting or in a substance use disorder context. The purpose of family therapy, again, sort of the generic definition would be there's often a goal to help family members improve communication, problem solve, and understand how to handle special situations, whether they be something significant like a death or divorce or serious injury, or some things related to substance use disorders, mental health disorders, and or adolescent issues. And the goal, really, the purpose is to create, at least improve or create a better functioning within the home environment. The description of family therapy, again, I think this is something that may vary depending on your own background, your own professional background, and your own upbringing or your own experiences in working with families. But typically the family therapy is initiated to address a specific or identified problem. And the sessions may also reveal additional issues that come up, even though the problem that initially was to be addressed may not be forgotten. It may be something that is, and there may be other issues that come up or surface that are added to the identified initial problem or issue that was raised at the onset or initiation of the family being involved in the therapeutic process. And again, therapists who work as a team can model the behaviors for the family through their interactions with each other during the session, particularly in a group session. I know being involved in the past, I had done some family groups, and I had a co-facilitator. I had that luxury, and oftentimes she and I could demonstrate or model certain behaviors as we communicated with one another to help reinforce maybe some skills, some communication skills that we were teaching. There's some challenges too, and I think anyone who has worked in the helping professions or in the behavioral health world, and I know there's a few of you listening now, will be able to relate to some of the challenges that are involved in working with the family in a therapeutic setting. There can be some very direct resistance or unwillingness, either on the part of the identified patient and or the family members, just not having the willingness or the energy or the time to get involved. And there also may be severe deterioration of the family unit, which can make unpacking some of these long-standing issues very challenging and difficult. And again, I mentioned this, but just the time and opportunity to engage the family. I don't know if anyone there has really tried to set up a family session and get everyone around the table. It can be very challenging to make that happen. Sometimes you have to do the best you can and maybe get one or two family members together at a time. And then just, again, I think I referenced this earlier, but having family members that are impaired, an example would be actively using, a parent or a spouse or a sibling that's actively using substances and trying to engage them in the therapeutic process can be sometimes do more harm than good, especially, and I think too about past cases where I was trying to involve a spouse or significant other in the process, and I had to be very careful if there was a domestic violence history, because this could really put the identified patient in an unsafe situation where they felt unwilling or unable to really share and be open without fear of reprisal. So very important. Terry, I hope my audio is okay. hopefully the signal will hold up for us here. And then just also revealing unresolved conflicts, also potential for harm or the marked increase for conflict. The last thing I want to do is create more conflict within the family. So being very careful about how to go about peeling back some of the issues. And then just general lack of staff, experience or training, and then maybe other barriers that you can think of. I don't know if anyone has some other challenges. Yeah, just getting them around into your office if they're living way out, on the reservation or just way out in a rural setting. So yeah, I think it's important too. I know that from a clinical perspective, I often felt that the provider must have the proper training and support before proceeding in the counseling process, because you can really run the risk of causing additional harm to the patient or the family unit. So I would just say, sometimes we don't have the luxury of training and the support we need, but always consult with your supervisor or make an appropriate referral if you're conducting formal family or couples therapy and that you feel like that's outside of your scope of practice. It's the ethical thing to do, and it's the right thing to do if possible. Sometimes you have to just sort of work with what you have, but I just wanted to put that out there. Involving the family peripherally or in smaller increments for some of the patient's overall treatment may be a better option for engaging the families. It helps you understand the family's role or influence in relationship to the patient. And I think Sean also mentioned to me that not all family members in a tribal family unit or in a native family unit, all family members may not be supportive of the individual's recovery, and I think that could extend into non-native families as well when we see this play out. Yeah, Sheila, I think you could, especially under the current situation. Using telehealth is really something that I think was one of the silver linings that will come out of this current situation we're in, where everyone is isolated and using telehealth exclusively. I think that's something that the silver lining that's going to come out of this as we move through this and start to get back to some sense of normalcy in our everyday lives. I want to just take a look at some foundational pieces, looking at both individual therapy compared to or comparable to family therapy. Individual therapy can provide that concentrated, specific focus to help people become more fully themselves. And if we look at family therapy, this really takes this idea that the dominant force in their lives are located externally within the family. Family therapy is directed towards changing the organization of the family in order to benefit the individuals within that system. Hope that makes sense to everyone. Let's take a look at some different perspectives on this. Murray Bowen took a comprehensive, this Bowenian perspective on family treatment or family therapy. Murray Bowen was born in the early part of the 20th century and really took a comprehensive view of human behavior and human problems. Bowenian perspective looks at unresolved issues within our original families, really saw this as the most important component of working with the family. And it centered around this idea of counterbalancing togetherness and individuality. And I like that concept because I think it really is a balance. And then just focused also on differentiation between balancing thinking and feeling, and trying to keep those two with equal salience and importance. There's more out there on the Bowenian perspective if you're interested. I have information too if you're interested. The experiential perspective. This perspective was really was largely founded on the idea that cause and effect of family problems is emotional suppression, which again is a pretty bold statement, sometimes difficult to evidence. But this experiential perspective said that it was really designed, the approach was designed to change families by changing family members. So by changing the individuals within the family itself was changed. Families are treated as a group of individuals more than as a system. So again, it differs a bit from your standard systems approach. It also enhanced sensitivity, expanded awareness, and seeing those as essential aims of treatment. And then the focus on interpersonal change and a commitment to growth as opposed to problem solving. So that's the experiential perspective. Somebody, oh, Kate, are you off the mute there, or somebody may be off mute? I'm not sure. Just hearing a little background noise. Structural family therapy. This really was a way of looking at families very specifically. This idea that every family has a structure revealed when the family is in action, and really seeing the family as a patient, which I think is an interesting concept as well. And then just some of the techniques that would be used in a structural family therapy are listed here. Just reframing, which is something probably some of us have done in our own practices. Punctuation, unbalancing, restructuring, enactment, boundary formation, and then working with spontaneous interaction, intensity, and shaping competence. The structural family therapy really requires some specific training if you want to utilize it, but it's definitely worth exploring if you are working with families within your practice. Eric Erickson and Gregory Bateson also took another perspective called the strategic perspective, and it really it's derived from the Ericksonian hypnotherapy and Batesonian cybernetics. And again, this is definitely an approach in working with families that requires some specific training and guidance. But they developed a powerful body of procedures, and they vary in specifics of theory and technique. It's worth looking into. I do have more information about this, but it really, I think, in a nutshell, it really is about establishing balance between ourselves and our social world, sort of that biopsychosocial world. Interesting perspective, though, to keep in mind. If you're interested, I have more information for you. This is another perspective or approach that maybe some of us are more familiar with. Well, here, Rodrigo is asking, how long do you family therapy? How long do you do family therapy? It depends. I mean, the frequency and duration really may be driven by your agency. It may be driven by the family's willingness and ability to engage, and there are all a number of factors. I know that when I was working with families exclusively, we had a 12-week curriculum, so it allowed us to, which was really, it was an integrated model, so that it involved.
Your microphone has been turned on.
It can be, I think it can be something that, yes, and it can be goal-driven instead of time-driven. Yes, it can. Certainly, there's no prescribed set time. If you accomplish your goals and improve family function in 3 sessions, then I want your notes so I know how to do that. Again, I think if we have the luxury of extending and making it a long-term process, fantastic. Oftentimes, though, there are limits placed on the amount of sessions that insurance will cover, the amount of sessions that the agency is able to offer as far as content or curriculum-driven manualized services. So, yeah, appreciate that, Rodrigo. Let's look at some current perspectives. The solution-focused perspective, I think, is worth looking at. It's something that I was able to utilize in practice in the early 2000s in a project we did working with youth and families. It has sort of this pragmatic sort of minimalism embodied in it. It has a cognitive emphasis and has easily teachable techniques. It de-emphasizes the history and pathology and focuses more on the now and moving forward. The patients, families, the identified patients asked to concentrate on solutions rather than on problems, and they have little to say about how problems arise. Again, the focus is on the future. Prominent contributors are listed here. I think I know when I was utilizing this approach in a family systems project or a family therapy project with youth with substance use disorders, and then working with their families as well. This was in the early mid 2000s. We were trained to not even use the word problem. We had to use the word issue or concern. So there was even an emphasis placed on how the language that you used. And this was really meant to keep things focused on only on the positive and only on future-oriented goals. But it was, as Rodrigo said, we had 12 weeks to do this, but there were certainly options for follow-up care, and we did some post-longitudinal follow-up as part of the study as well. Narrative perspective, I haven't practiced this, but it always sounded intriguing to me. The narrative perspective, it looks at personal narrative and social construction, the narrative truth versus the historical truth. This idea, that that's incompatible with systems thinking has distanced itself from the concepts and methods of traditional family therapy. And it's got some very specific techniques, stories and narratives that can be shared. They brought meaning to the world, and they have allowed for history and tradition to be related through generations. This idea of storytelling and how we respond to stories or narratives is the concern of the narrative therapy. Both the ones we create ourselves, but also those that we ascribe to use, ascribed to us by others. So it's an interesting approach. I've never had a chance to practice it, but I think it could have some applications through this narrative therapy in collaboration with a trained therapist. It suggested that a person can discover or re-author their own problem-saturated stories. So it's pretty intriguing. Yeah. Maria says she uses the word challenge. Yeah, Gary, I like that idea of using growth areas. I like that concept, too, of post-traumatic growth. I like that sort of spin on that. The functional perspective, again, I have a lot of information on this if you're interested, but the functional perspective in the family therapy context looks at, is concerned with the function that a family's behaviors are designed to achieve. So, why is the family functioning this way? What's the purpose of this? Assumes that most family behaviors are an attempt to become more or less intimate, which I find to be an interesting concept. And then in addition to that, it sets sort of this contingency management up to help them get the kind of intimacy they want more directly. So it allows for some practice and some ways to break down barriers that maybe are prohibiting the family from being closer than they would like to be. And then it blends sort of some strategic and behavioral therapies. It's an interesting approach. Again, I haven't had a chance to practice this in its purest form. I've not been trained in this, but if you're interested, I'm happy to share with you what I have. The family disease perspective, I think, is also something important to keep in mind. Now, when I think of the disease model, or this idea or notion, Minnesota model sometimes is referred to, I really think about 12-step approach, this idea within this framework of the family disease perspective, and how it relates to substance use disorders. It really encourages people to fight problems with medication, support groups, education, rather than to explore the network of relationships in which the problems are embedded. And again, that's sort of a blanket statement, but I think it's important to note that there is some merit with this disease perspective. And for some, this idea of utilizing that pathway for recovery as a family, or as a template for family therapy, can be effective if administered properly and at the right time within the family dynamic. But again, I think I have more information on that. Just due to time, we're not going to go into these perspectives too deeply. I want to touch on the multi-systemic and multidimensional family perspectives. This resulted out of research with difficult adolescents. I really thought all adolescents were difficult, but maybe there's a pocket that aren't. Again, there's trying to get some humor in there. I know you guys are all laughing out there in the virtual world. I appreciate that. How many adolescents does it take to change a light bulb? Anybody? Yes. Rodrigo says 1. He is correct. However, you have to tell the adolescent you'd rather they didn't change the light bulb. Okay, yes, I'm hoping I get, maybe I've shared that joke with some of you before, so I don't know. I was at my old clinic for so long that all my jokes were old to everybody. So when I left my clinic, I thought, gosh, I've got all this material that will be new to this new team I'm with. So this resulted out of working with difficult adolescents. It's a combination of techniques, and is built around a couple of metaphors, personal narrative and social construct, narrative truth versus historic truth. Again, kind of looking at this existentialization of behavior, not the person. Multidimensional family therapy, MDFT, by Howard Little is another example. I don't know if anyone's heard of that approach. And it just actively is considering and intervening into extrafamilial systems in which families are embedded. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Ray. I will not be entering and moving to my stand-up comedy routines anytime soon, so I will stick with my day job. I appreciate that, brother. Thank you. And here's the MDFT, again, developed by Howard Little in 1985, integrated comprehensive family-centered treatment for teen drug abuse and related behavioral problems. It's a very interesting approach. I had an opportunity to do a little training in this area, and it definitely is patient-driven and very empowering to the youth and family because they really dictate the direction that the treatment goes. Excuse me. MDFT focuses on key areas of adolescent's life and provides an effective, cost-efficient treatment milieu. Yeah, it's an interesting approach. If you want to know more about it, I can share with you what I have. Strategies and techniques for working with families. Now, this list I derived from a few resources, but also from my own experience. In my years of providing family services to youth and parents or guardians, I learned how important some of these strategies can be. Very, very important. I have also come to realize how difficult it has been to apply these suggestions to my own family. It's one thing to work with others' families and have that objectivity, sometimes trying to take that home. It can be a real challenge. So I put that out there for some of you that are working in the field and have families of your own. It can be very confusing at times. So these are some strategies. We can just touch on these briefly, but just even something as simple as how you have the room arranged. I often would make sure that I sat with the youth, and maybe the parents would sit strategically so that we didn't feel like we were all sitting and sort of picking on the adolescent in the family setting. So I would make sure the chairs were distributed evenly around the room. Calm, comfortable environment, and just some other sort of intuitive components. Trying to model some communication. Managing conflict and negative language. There were times where I would ask for us to have a break in mid-session because things were escalating and maybe we needed to, they were becoming counterproductive. So sometimes we would take a short break and let everybody kind of cool off, and that was helpful sometimes too. So I don't know if others have had experiences with that. Yeah, I like that idea, Gary, finding a starting point for each family member. Yeah, I'd like to have a conversation about that. We have more time. Just some cultural considerations, and again, I think these are some things to keep in mind as we move through this notion of working with families, and I'm sure that many of you would probably be able to add to this discussion if we were live, being able to interact with each other on a little more fluid basis. But just the definition of family of origin, I think, is something we need to be culturally sensitive about. The birth or biological family or any family system instrumental or significant in a patient's early development. That's just, again, sort of that generic kind of umbrella statement of family of origin. Some cultural considerations. Just think about some of the immigration issues and with the sort of this globalization of many cultures mixing together now for the first time, in recorded history. And then just some other things, is your own worldview healthy? Do you see your worldview through a lens that is considerate of others and takes those things into account? And I think that this idea that differences aren't necessarily problematic. I often found myself looking for similarities with those patients, that especially with those that were vastly different from me, just focusing on what we had in common. This sometimes afforded an opportunity for me to see our differences in a different way if I focused first on what we had in common. I don't know if that makes sense to others, but and then just some other considerations. An overemphasis on ethnicity can lead to the clinician or therapist or counselor to exaggerate those differences between themselves and their patients. So it's something to be cautious and aware of. And just to know, I think, and to just try and keep in mind that ethnicity is a powerful meaning generator. In other words, it can really impact how we attach meaning and purpose to ourselves and from our patients' perspectives. Race and ethnicity, just looking at American Indians and Native Americans and Alaskan Natives, I think, and I'm not going to try and break this down, but I think it's important when I talk with Sean Baer, our co-director, just giving me this sense that there's a deep interconnection, and it's multi-generational when we look at the Native American family based on some Native traditions. Yeah, I would agree, Frank. I would agree. I would love to see that formally in action. I think I've seen it informally. So I think just for lack of time, I don't want to try and go too deeply into this. If someone has a thought about this slide, if it's accurate or if it makes sense, I think just the idea that grandparents are everyone's grandparents is kind of what how Sean was trying to explain it to me, to help this non-native understand a little bit better and break away from my own understanding of what family means. There are some similarities, but I like the notion that it makes sense to me that everyone is interrelated, even if they're not by blood. I agree, James. Humor is a fantastic way to break some tension. I can recall I had a father and son meeting one time. It was a scheduled session, and the father came in first, and he said, "I'm very concerned. I have something I need to bring up during the session." And then the son came in, and we sat down at the table, and right away the dad reached into his pocket, and he said, "This is what I found under your bed last night." And it was a big bottle of vodka, about half full. And there was just some silence, and the tension was palpable. But I know I said to the dad, I'm really glad that you were able to put this issue on the table, and we laughed a little bit, and it kind of broke that tension. And then we had a more serious conversation about the relapse that this youth had been undergoing with this stash of vodka. So I agree. Sometimes humor can be a wonderful way to break down some barriers. Yeah, I don't know, Rita, about that Aboriginal healing. It's interesting. I'm not familiar with that term. I don't know if anybody else is. But I wanted to share this slide with you just to give you an understanding of one perspective on the Native American family structure from a visual standpoint. This was helpful for me, I'm a visual person, so it helped me understand a little bit better. And then this is just another example in the Dakota, Lakota, Nakota sort of perspective. The 7 values, and I think these are there are other tribes may have similar value systems. They may be a little different, but there may be some commonalities amongst tribes regarding sort of life values. Sometimes referred to, as Sean said to me, sometimes they're referred to as the 7 grandfathers in some tribes. But I like these values. I actually have these values on my whiteboard at my office that I can't get to, but they really had an impact on me because they resonated with me even as a non-native. I want to just spend a little time talking about sexual orientation, gender orientation, native LGBTQ, and two-spirit concept. Again, I think this is just meant as an overview to sort of weave this into this idea of working with families, significant others, and within the family structure. The LGBT population may create replacement family networks that are made up of individuals who are significant to them, when individuals that they were connected to maybe have passed or are no longer an immediate part of the family's life because of a variety of reasons. This may include friends, partners, families of partners, ex-significant others, or blood relatives. It's important to keep in mind, it goes back to this idea of how we define family, and how I see that might be different from, a patient that I'm working with, whether it's in the LGBTQ population or not. I wanted to look at just the stages of family change. I think this is again, we're going to put this sort of in the context of recovery, early recovery, and then through to long-term recovery. As a person in long-term recovery, I know that the impact on families can be significant. Even as the person begins to recover, there's a lot of dynamics that still need to be addressed, even as the person progresses through and adjusts to this new life of sobriety. The family also adjusts in many, many ways. Some family dynamics to keep in mind. I don't know if the term codependency is used as much. I know there's another term. I think it's relationship addiction, or I don't know if anyone has a more current term for codependency. But its broadest definition just is someone that cannot function on their own, and whose thinking and behavior is instead organized around another person, process, or substance. So it's that idea of being codependent on a person, place, or thing. Other words could be dysfunctional families. Yeah, I like that, prodependence. Adria, I like that term. I've not heard of that before. We often also, I'm careful with this term as well, because I think we're wired to sort of enable one another just by default. But there's this term of enabling. I think sometimes can be overused, but it's something that I think there is a time and a place to address that if we see this occurring within the family dynamic. Control over others, or controlling others as they believe they are incapable of taking care of themselves. It's sort of connected to that enabling concept, and there may be some self-esteem issues and a tendency to kind of put the person to put themselves last, or deny their own feelings, or validate their own thoughts or ideas. and then just overly compliant with things, even if they're unhealthy. And we may see that in a lot of different power structures within relationships that are unhealthy. Just some other family dynamics. We can see an overreaction, being overly sensitive, being hypervigilant, or just not being able to handle stress of any kind within the family. And there's also this sense of sort of unconditional loyalty, even though the person may be doing nothing to really warrant that type of commitment or loyalty. And then just feel that there may be a dynamic too where they feel less able or powerless to influence changing the family in any way. They may check out or distance themselves or become a little more detached. And then, of course, domestic violence is really can be a killer on a lot of different levels and in a lot of different ways. And we see a strong correlation between substance use disorders and domestic violence. There's an extreme correlation between the two. And I think I remember seeing data that 9 out of 10 domestic violence cases involved alcohol or drug use of some kind. And I can't give you a source, but I'm sure that that is probably pretty accurate. I don't know how others feel about that. There's a TED Talk if you're interested pertaining to domestic violence or working with families. That whole idea of why doesn't the person just get out of that relationship? But it addresses that issue, and certainly something maybe worth checking out if you're interested. I can send you that link after the broadcast today. Just to address some other dynamics, when you have a patient who lives with a partner and a minor child, there may be some issues that come up with those children or those young adults. I think those are worth at least looking at and considering. Just always asking yourself, is what you're disclosing when you're working with families, if you're disclosing information or uncovering information, is that to the benefit of the patient? But I think some of these issues are important to keep in mind if you're working with a patient who's living with a partner and a minor child. It may or may not be theirs biologically, but they may be still fulfilling a role as a parent or guardian. Just another thing to keep in mind with the patient who's living with a partner and a child, just some other things you might see within that child or within any member of the family, but particularly with the youth or with children. These are some other things to keep in mind. An adolescent who lives with family of origin, again, we can see some of these behaviors playing out. Not always, but certainly these are some common factors that we see with an adolescent who is living, within that family system. And this could be enhanced or certainly accentuated with the presence of substance use or undiagnosed mental health issues. And again, these are, I know most of you are probably familiar with some of these, but the effects of substance use disorders on the family, I think, just again, some things to keep in mind. If the patient lives with a partner, how that will affect that partner, or vice versa. Patients living with children and a partner, if the patient's a part of a blended family, that can add another layer of complexity, especially if there's substance use going on, active substance use going on, either with the identified patient or with another member of the family that your identified patient is involved in. older patients with adult children, and adolescent patients within their family of origin. The clinician involvement. And again, I think, we don't have a lot of time. I have a lot of information on these 4 different levels of the clinician's involvement with families. I think probably most of us would be at a level 1 or 2, simply by design or by training or by the dynamics within your agency or your patient population. But we're going to kind of go through these just to give you an idea that your level of involvement as a clinician or practitioner may really be driven by several factors, but it may be identified in these 4 different levels. So the level 1, I think is important. And again, I don't have a lot of time to go through these, but I do have quite a bit of information, if you're interested, about how these different levels are of involvement on the clinician's part are viewed. And I think it's important because it would drive your approach. And but level 1 is minimal. It's this minimal emphasis on family interaction. The service provider just deals with the family only as required by sort of practical necessity. So it's very, very minimal or peripheral. There may be other times in level 2 this information and to advise and inform. This may just really be, you may have some content information about families, parenting, or child development. Open to engaging parents in collaborative ways, and there may just be some minimal, communication skills that you work on with the family in this level. Level 3 is a little more involved. It may involve specific training, but really this is understanding individual and family reactions to stress and the emotional aspects of the group process. So you may also, in this 3rd level, you may be working with the families not only as a unit, but also in a group setting, which can be challenging without training and support. And then in that 4th level, your involvement with the family dynamic or the family unit is really you're being aware of your own participation in the process, including one's own family system, the systems of the parents and the larger community systems. So it's much more involved, and it may be asking a series of questions to elicit a detailed picture of the family dynamic and of the family's issues or concerns. But it'll be something that you would be very focused on solution and very, very targeted to the family as a whole. I have more information on these four levels if you're interested. Yeah, that's a great question, Rodrigo. There's, again, I think it would depend on your agency and the resources you have and your own training and background. I think it's not so much the approach, but rather the level of involvement or the amount of commitment and involvement emphasis you place on having the family be part of that therapeutic process. I can send you some information too, Rodrigo, if you're interested on just looking at those levels in more detail. We could probably spend a whole webinar just talking about those different levels. Again, I think most practitioners, unless they're an MFT or trained and licensed in family therapy, would just be in those first two levels. Just some other things to keep in mind, just kind of some overview here. Anyone heard of the 7 C's for couples and families? Anybody heard of this? I really hadn't by name, but just some things to keep in mind if you do find yourself working with couples or families. Maybe if you aren't prepared or don't feel like you have the training, but just some things to keep in mind. The 7 C's are listed here: character features, cultural and ethnic factors, contract features, commitment, caring, communication, and conflict resolution. So again, just briefly going over these 7 C's. Character. If we can think about this as the characteristics of a person that tend to be persistent and play a major role in defining that individual. This may, these character features may have served this patient well or this family member well for many, many years, and it may have helped them work through and cope with many difficulties. So they may be, they may be resistant or unwilling to change some of those character features about themselves. The 7 C's, cultural and ethnic factors. Again, remember that not all cultures view life, relationships, and family the same as you. So check your own cultural biases, values, and beliefs. So there are variable forms, the variables that form the context in which individuals and couples exist. It can be very complex, but I think a good starting point is to kind of check your own biases in the beginning to make sure that you're as objective and as receptive as you can be if you're working with couples or families. And then just know that the surrounding cultural forces shape relationships, and I think that is even more important now with some of the things we're going through with some of the isolation. Just knowing that we're being asked to separate and stay away from the people that maybe are most important to us and that we place the most value in. So it can be very unsettling. Just some contract features. Just know that a contract. Sometimes I don't know if anyone's done a behavioral contract with a patient or had done maybe a treatment contract, but it's a set of implicit or explicit expectations that in this case the partners or couples would have or the family would have with one another. It's explicit. It's attainable. It's got to be a mutual decision, and it has to be beneficial to both both partners or both parties or both group of family members. Marriage, is not always seen as a contract, but more of an agreement. Couples marrying for love is actually kind of a new process. Before this, marriage was done out of obligation to the family of origin. Maybe it involved land titles or some family rules, and important to keep those things in mind, that relationships sometimes, whether it's a common law marriage or a formal marriage or a long-term relationship, coming up with a contract should be mutually agreed upon. And then commitment, the notion of commitment. The relationships that the couple's relationship or the family relationships may have difficulty, but they will stabilize over time. And I think it's important to note this pledged or devoted or obligation to oneself and being involved with, remaining loyal to, and remaining in a relationship over time. Stability and quality are those two types. And caring, I think, is something that we intrinsically see and find within this field. Oftentimes we're involved in this field because we have a deep compassion and caring for others and the well-being of others. But in this context, we're talking about a person's ability to express behaviors that promote emotional and physical intimacy. And I think in working with couples, this can be very salient. This notion of caring can be expressed through affection and sexual intimacy. It can be expressed through mutual activities. It can be expressed through quality or time together and enjoying supportive and comparable, mutually comparable friendship. Communication, again, I think that's a word we like to throw around a lot. Couples and families that take time to communicate with one another, tend to function better. Communication really is about negotiations and concessions, finding a middle ground. Couples or families that are at odds because of internal thoughts or feelings or emotions, something to keep in mind. Subjective self-interpretations of language and behavior in the relationships are also important factors. Positive daily communication equals relationship success. Negative communications are characterized by expressions of negative feelings, and really can be quite debilitating. And the message is often not heard by the listener or the recipient. Conflict resolution. This acronym SOLVE, or I don't know, what do you call those things where you have what are they called? Some kind of, I can't think of what they're called, where you have the word that spells out like that vertically. I can't think of the name of those. The name for it. But anyway, it's the acronym is SOLVE. SOLVE, really, it's a nice way or a nice tool to use perhaps with a couple or with a family to help guide them through some conflict resolution. It involves slowing down, outlining options, look at the consequences, vote and evaluate. That might work well with a family where you have a lot of conflict, a high frequency of conflict within that family dynamic. Just in summary, the 7 C's again can be a guideline. It's very important to approach conversations in a positive, calm manner, and if needed, take a break to calm things down. A lot of people, I think it's important to remember that a lot of people, myself included, make poor choices when they're experiencing, negative thoughts or feelings or emotions. And just to approach this, you want to approach this in this idea that you want to have no regrets afterwards. So framing it like that, with a couple as they work through and try and find some common ground. But just taking time to think through personal and relationship areas helps identify strengths to build upon and have some goals connected to that to work on. Those are just some things kind of listed out there, some thought points, kind of what we've talked about in the 7 C's. They're all sort of laid out right there. But I thought that might be useful for some of you that find yourselves, especially now, maybe working with families even in a telehealth sort of medium, being able to give them some concrete things to keep in mind or work on, as we're all under a lot of stress and have a lot of anxiety right now about what's going to happen. Just taking a family history, I think, again, this is pretty self-explanatory, but there's a lot of different ways to do this. What's the genogram, I think, is one. And just, making sure that as a clinician, you understand what the family history is, or at least have an idea maybe even spending the first couple of sessions, if you have that luxury, getting a sense of the family's history. But these are just some examples of things you can use. And then I think with a special population, the LBGT population, which sometimes is left out or glossed over in this process, some questions too that you can ask if you're working with a couple or a family that may have a patient or a family member who is part of the LBGT community. And then just some guidelines for working with LGBT families. Those are pretty self-explanatory. But just again, so these can be some guidelines. And maybe some of you have utilized this in working with LGBT families or other families where there may be a specific dynamic or a history where it involves something that may be outside of the mainstream or not what we would see in a typical family dynamic. It's important though to make sure that you're exclusive and aware of what's going on so that no one's ostracized or left out. We can see this play out in other populations as well. Just individual and organizational mission, and again, building on this idea of working with individuals in the LBGT community. Again, they sometimes are left out and invisible in this process. So just making sure that you are not excluding anyone based on sexual orientation or gender identity, and that your perceptions are not overly heterosexual in their bias. Excuse me. So again, it should be something that should be part of your agency's policy for equal opportunity, and that everyone is treated with dignity and respect and is part of the patient population. So yeah, it looks like we have a few minutes for some questions or anything you would like me to circle back to. We certainly can. But I do appreciate everyone. Great turnout, and it's good to see some familiar names on the chat board, and I certainly appreciate everyone's attention and time. We could spend quite a bit more time on the topic of family treatment or family therapy or couples therapy, but really want to thank everyone and want to wish everyone the best, and you all hang in there and know that this too will pass, and we're all in this together.
While we're waiting for any questions to come in, I just want to remind everyone we did record this session, so we'll be sending you an email that will have a link to the recording if you want to review it again later, or if you want to share it with anyone that you work with. We would love for you to do that. And we'll also have handouts of the slides that we'll send out in that email as well as the CEU request form, and a link to our survey in case you don't get redirected to that as we close out here.
I'm happy to forward any information. I've got some notes in some of these slides. If you want some additional information, feel free to email me, and I'll be happy to send that out. I'm not going anywhere, so I am right here in my apartment. Feel free to reach out. Would love to correspond with you and talk some more. So thanks again.
Steve, I see a question here about the Minnesota model. Is it more like the 12-step program?
Yes, the short answer is yes. Minnesota model and the disease model and the 12-step approach are really synonymous. it's driven out of that AA movement and out of the Oxford groups in the 20s and 30s, and is still very largely popular amongst many treatment programs. So it has a place. It's one pathway. There are many, many pathways to recovery.
Wonderful. Okay, so yeah, a lot of people were asking about handouts and the recordings, and I know some of you couldn't hear me, so I put a note there. Hopefully everyone knows that we'll be sending that out in our follow-up emails. So
Yes.
You'll have our contact info there too.
Yeah, and I know Bruce has asked the question about White Bison Wellbriety movement. Does it still exist? And the answer is yes, Bruce. They do have an active website, and it's very similar to the Red Road, and there's a lot of information that is comparable to the Red Road and that recovery path. So yes, the answer is yes.
Wonderful. Yeah, thanks so much for all your questions and comments, and thank you, Steve, for teaching us today. It's great to be with all of you, great to see all the interaction, and to get to connect all across the country, and to just to know that you're all out there and caring for the people in your communities, and hope we are all doing that here, and just wanted to send blessings out to all of you, and thank you again for joining us.